afternoon, and welcome to the latest installment of Power Huddle, Inside the Mind of ESG Gurus, and the very first session of 2025. I am Heidi Friedman, a partner and co-chair of Thompson Hine's ESG Collaborative. During this monthly series, I chat one-on-one with innovative ESG execs. These unscripted discussions will examine how these company execs from various industries are actively paving the way as ESG trendsetters and championing pragmatic ESG strategies to align with business values while building a sustainability framework to advance their company's ESG goals. Joining me today is Mindy Kairis, Director of Regulatory Law and Government Affairs at Owens Corning, and she is most definitely an ESG guru. She brings 2 decades of experience in environmental health, safety, and sustainability. Mindy develops and implements company policies to maintain compliance with environmental laws and upholds rigorous health and safety standards. Additionally, Mindy leads sustainability programs aimed at achieving organizational goals and aligning with international reporting frameworks. Mindy also manages Owens Corning's government affairs initiatives, fostering strategic relationships with policymakers and regulatory agencies to support the company's growth objectives. Welcome, Mindy. So excited to have you. You're like the OG ESG person. Oh, I'm excited.
I'm happy to be here. I don't know about the OG, but I'll take it for right now. Good way to start 2025.
Exactly. So a few short little housekeeping items here. Today's program is being recorded. It will be available to view in our library of recordings on Thompson Hine's YouTube channel. It will also be let out, like, I can't think of the right word, but then it will be converted to the Environmental Laws podcast, and you'll be able to hear it there as well. Released. That was what I was thinking. This presentation is intended for the general information of individuals and organizations on matters of current interest. The thoughts and opinions being expressed today are those of the individual panel members only and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the panel members' clients, employers, affiliates, or Thompson Hine. The content should not be taken as advice, as the views expressed are for informational purposes only. Last but not least, we love questions. So put your chat to Heidi Friedman, and if we have time during our discussion, I'll do my very best to pose your question to Mindy. So Mindy, let's get started. Tell us a little bit about your ESG journey specifically, because I know you have been more involved in sort of what was historically sustainability for many years before it was, become this ESG umbrella that we're dealing with now.
Yeah, this is where I start to kind of feel a little old, which I never, the years start to have
the wrong person, sister.
I mean, for me, it all started off just wanting to be an environmental attorney. So went to Michigan State and got a master's or a bachelor's in environmental policy, and led to law degree, and then eventually a master's of law in international environmental law, and spent about 10 years with the US EPA in their Office of General Counsel, which gave me a lot of visibility to not just only the ins and out of environmental compliance and the regulatory aspect. And I was, helping to draft rules, regulations, and then defending them ultimately. But I think the ESG piece of it, I think really for me focused was on learning more about environmental justice, which started kind of a passion with me, starting from at Michigan State when I first learned about it, and Cancer Alley and all of those pieces. And then at EPA, working on their sustainability procurement policy, and working with some really great, amazing thought leaders. So, over time, it's been just an evolution, which for me made total sense. And it was a kind of a pinnacle to then end up at Owens Corning, which, it has really been kind of ahead of the game on ESG and sustainability overall.
Yeah, I think I wanted you to talk a little bit more about your roles there with ESG.
Yeah.
But I thought before we get there, can you just, is something that has not actually come up very much on these calls, but I think is essential, is environmental justice. Do you take a second just to explain what that is and where it fits in the umbrella, just so folks who might not be as familiar might, you know, have a better understanding of that?
Sure. Environmental justice, and I almost think of it more as just community engagement, which, because that's really what it is. It's about meaningful community engagement to ensure that the people, the industry or the regulated community that's operating there is operating in a compliant manner and is not affecting the public health and environment in an adverse way or unfair way. The way that it's kind of played out over the years is, you know, ultimately in minority populations, low socioeconomic populations, you have an onslaught of industry there, which, you know, has an impact ultimately on air quality, water quality, and the like.
Yeah, it's sort of like I always view it as integration of E and S on some level, because we have these environmental conditions and we can't lose the S, and it really does fall under that umbrella. And I think that companies like Owens that are committed to ESG are often committed to building relationships with the communities in which they have facilities. And I know you guys are really good and proactive about having community engagement groups and things like that. And I just think that's kind of a fun thing to, not fun, but, you know, an interesting thing to mention, because it has not come up in a lot of my discussions. And I do think it's something that you guys are committed to, and it's really important.
I think I mean, to me, there's like the operational risk piece of it, just from a compliant, like, you know, how do we continue operating? But, you know, the majority of our people that work at our plants live in these communities as well. I mean, we're crucial to their environment, and I mean that in like the larger sense.
Sure.
And they're crucial to the way that we operate ultimately. So we care about our communities, and we really do, you know, want to be beyond like that idea of a good neighbor. But how do you meaningfully engage? And to me, that's kind of like the quintessential piece of what ESG is, right? The environmental social governance piece of it kind of all coming together.
Yeah, I love that. That was a great way to start. So talk a little bit about your roles with ESG at OC.
Yeah, so I get the great honor of working with who I think are like some of the best sustainability professionals. You know, I will say at OC, we don't really call things like the ESG piece. We have like a sustainability function, and I get the pleasure of reviewing our amazing sustainability report, which is a massive undertaking that is probably going on month to month, day to day, 365 days a year.
Well, you guys have been doing that for like decades.
Since 2006 was our first report.
Yeah. See, I was right, decades, almost 20 years.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think it's been I get to kind of work on that, but also our 2030 goals. How do we meet that? How do we lead on that? What is the roadmap? What I love about the work that I do is it's beyond just compliance. It's about creating value that align with our growth strategies overall, and how do you quantify that? Where do you get, how do you influence? And that's where like the government affairs piece comes into place too, which brings me back to my DC days, and I love it. And it's great and fun to kind of create connections and create proactive solutions that differentiate ourselves and provide long-term value to our shareholders.
Yeah, and what I love about your perspective is you've had the inside regulatory perspective, and now you have this corporate perspective for a company who's been doing this stuff for decades and is now kind of a trendsetter, and you're able to kind of even up the game further. So I love that. And so that leads me to ask you a little bit about the upcoming regulatory framework. And so we can all look at that crystal ball. I will tell you that, you know, I think it's highly unlikely we're going to see anything necessarily from the SEC or the FTC in the next 4 years. I don't think that that's helpful, actually. You know, clients actually want some direction, believe it or not. I'm sure some people are very happy, but others, most of the folks I talk to are frustrated. But then we have the global framework and nothing, and I actually have talked to folks in the EU where things are speeding up. And then we certainly have a state level stuff, but not really that impactful yet. California certainly, but that keeps getting delayed. So we're kind of at this state and global level with nothing in the middle. And how are you guys working through that?
We're subject to CSRD, and that's kind of driving our overall action and work and strategy overall, which, suffice it to say, is not the easiest thing to do, because trying to figure out what the requirements are, quite frankly, is like,
you're not alone, actually, for sure.
It's like trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future. And this is, coming from someone who likes regulatory interpretation, but oh my God, I will say it is really challenging. And I know we're not alone. I mean, I know a lot of companies are still trying to kind of figure out, what do we actually have to disclose and what don't we have to disclose, and
right
those pieces. But I think
it's more than E. So I'm assuming that you guys are a 2026 reporting based on 25, or is it sooner for you? Okay, all right, got it.
Yeah, and I think that you go through like the basic framework of what you're supposed to do, so understanding the requirements, and quite frankly, that's the part that's kind of challenging. The other piece is, I think you hear it's sustainability directive, but really it's a financial reporting. And in many cases, from a company perspective, financial is separate from that kind of reporting, which can create, you need to build that infrastructure and make sure that you have good communication and the right information and data coming in. And corporations are really complex, all the different entities, everything else. So it's definitely a challenge. There's a lot of opportunity, but right now it's building out the reporting systems and figuring out what we need to do. So California, we keep track of whatever we can keep track of, but I think the CSRD ultimately will be kind of the mammoth umbrella, and everything else will be kind of mini underneath it. So as long as we're complying with CSRD, I think there'll be I'm a little bit less concerned about how we comply with anything else that may pop up.
I think that's a really fair perspective. I've learned a lot about company structure and working with consultants and clients on the CSRD. I mean, we just get questions all the time, and it is super complex. People don't know, am I reporting at the parent level, or what level am I doing all of this? So it'll be interesting. I mean, I think we're all learning together, so I think that that's a good thing. And even if you're not a global company, it'll probably be pushed down to you in some way, shape, or form. So based on that, what would you recommend that maybe a company who hasn't, whether it's private or whatever, hasn't really built out its program, but yet its stakeholders still feel like they want commitment to, some of the ESG principles? How do you get started with that?
I think it's understanding what exactly the expectations are. So, and I think really that what you're kind of talking about even is from like the transparency requirements that we're starting to see too, and like CSDDD and all the other different parts for our suppliers. I for one, working and collaborating and understanding what you're committing to. Can you commit to it? If you can't, what can you do from a realistic perspective? And then building out the infrastructure, whether that's data driven, which in many cases it is, but there's a lot of components to it. And I think it also requires a lot of just discussion overall internally, to make sure everybody understand what the implications are, what are the unintended consequences. Can you play those all out from a scenario perspective? And I recommend getting a really good consultant.
Yeah, and who's responsible for what, right? Like,
oh my God,
like, are the right people around the table for all of this? I mean, that's, really
like doing a RACI is probably one of the most important things
Explain,
to
I
be
know what a
doing.
RACI is,
Yeah,
but explain to people what a RACI is. I love those. I learned about a RACI matrix a couple of years ago, and in the ESG context, I'm obsessed because everyone has a job in a level of review, but you explain it.
so it's just a framework in terms of responsibility, accountability, consulting, and inform. So who are those stakeholders internally so that it's really clear, okay, the sustainability function is going to be accountable for putting out the sustainability report at X time, but you have to consult legal. I have a consulting, all of those pieces so that things don't fall within the cracks, because inevitably someone's going to point fingers to be like, well, you were responsible for that. You were responsible for complying with that, providing that data. It's kind of like just a very, very, it seems basic.
Right, but it's a pretty picture with a lot of information.
So important. Yeah, and then being really
if anybody
specific.
On here doesn't have one and wants to see one, reach out and I'll share it with you, because I'm glad that you said that, because that's actually super helpful. And something else that's been unique, Mindy, that I thought you guys did a little bit, I would say early on, is talk a little bit about materiality assessments and the life of them. I think one of the things I'm seeing is people are not updating them regularly enough. One of the questions we got, for example, is, what do we do about DE&I now, with all this stuff? And I said, well, is it still an important issue to your stakeholders, or isn't it? Like, let them drive. And so how do you know that if you haven't updated your materiality assessment? And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, you guys actually did it by business unit. But
yeah,
can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we do it. So we do a materiality assessment every 5 years. And right now we're starting a double materiality. We started one last year in prep for CSRD, but every year in between the 5-year framework, we do what we call a refresh, which is for each region. So we're looking at the geographic regions specifically. So not so much on the businesses get kind of broken out, but it's more on like the geographic components of what's important to the geography or the cultural, the aspects for each region specifically. So we put the scopes on we reevaluate the scopes of the materiality, sustainability topics. We refresh the AI driven data and components of that. And then we kind of do
Is that like yearly, or like how often?
That's a yearly refresh that we do.
Oh, okay.
Like I said, we have one of the most amazing sustainability groups and people. I just amazing talent overall.
Yeah, that's a big commitment yearly. So, but things change. The environment changes. So that's actually probably strategic. Yeah. And talk to me a little bit about what role your suppliers play in that whole, stakeholder piece for you guys. And how are you interacting with them? Are you placing mandates on them? I'm sure customers might be placing mandates on you. Tell us a little bit of how you guys are handling that.
Yeah, the customer inquiries are insane, I won't lie. And sometimes our customers are also our suppliers and vice versa. Like, so there's just a lot of different dynamics involved. Talk about a really great area for a RACI. Like, we really had to make sure we understood who was doing what and how we were responding, because some of those inquiries don't go in through normal venues or ways either. But we have like more than 17,000 suppliers globally, and 84% of our scope 3 emissions actually are derived from our suppliers. So we've really focused a lot on collaboration from a scope 3 perspective, and how do we kind of drive reduction there, so reducing their scope 1. So how do we collaborate? How do we communicate? Our sustainability goal specifically with our suppliers is based off our supplier code of conduct, and it's a 2030 goal based off of really focused on forced labor and safety. And it's led to like really reevaluating our supplier code of conduct, what's engaged, what's involved, how do we certify, who are we certifying to, And then looking at risk overall, how do we audit, right? So how do you take a look at that? And then how do you evaluate a really sophisticated supplier versus a supplier who, you know, is pretty small and doesn't have as much infrastructure and isn't as sophisticated or knowledgeable. That may require a heavier hand, but that, you know, ultimately the idea is like, we want to provide training and support, we want to collaborate. And I think that's really important. So to just expect a supplier to just certify and sign off, one, I don't really think signing off on anything is ever going to be all that meaningful to begin with. But
yeah,
two, it's not helping at all either. So I think actually working together creates a way better dynamic, and ultimately gets us where we need to be on our goals and them where they need to be on their goals, because they're eventually going to be sucked into the transparency piece, whether it's us asking them or not.
Right, for sure. And I think collaboration is the key, is what I'm hearing here. But are you requiring any of your customers to like be EcoVadis certified, or any of, you know, SBTI or any of those kinds of things? Are you?
No, not at this point.
Okay.
No.
I mean, it's those are hard decisions, and I'll be interested to see, without the SEC, how much those certifications maintain their priority, because I think there's been a lot of mandates around those in the last couple of years.
Yeah, you're right. It's been challenging, and once again, I think it all comes down because not all suppliers are the same.
Right. Exactly. That's such an important recognition. So tell me right now, like, what would you say your biggest challenges, or Owens Corning, whether it's yourself or the company, whichever you rather share, around ESG right now?
I think it's data. I think creating the kind of data infrastructure that you need at the level and scope that's required in an ever-changing environment is incredibly complex and requires a lot of investment, a lot of attention, and a lot of resources and talent, ultimately.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, data analytics, from, you know, if anybody's looking, like has a kid who's going to college, tell them to go into data analytics, because I see that as like,
I'm too late.
I'm like, job security in every sense of, in every way. So,
and are you guys handling that in-house, or are you using a consultant, if you're willing to share about that?
We just kicked off, or we're kicking off like a 3-year digitization project. So we'll be working with a couple of vendors. I mean, I think what we actually had we've been doing all of our reporting through an internal base like system that was derived, but you know, that worked really well up until the point where all of these mandatory reporting frameworks came into place, and to do third-party assurance and everything else. And we do all of that, and we are SCS, you know, assured and certified and everything else. But with the finance piece coming in, like just making sure everything is communicating with one another.
The big accounting firms are the ones benefiting the most from CSRD and everything. I
totally agree with that.
Exactly. Have your kids go so they can be a consultant there, an accountant there. And what would you say is your biggest ESG success? And it doesn't have to be recent, just generally.
I mean, beyond just, I think that, you know, we've made a lot of progress in our scope 1 and 2 absolute emissions, and, you know, from a company perspective, but my personal is, and it goes back to the environmental justice is a component. We kicked off, and we've developed a community engagement toolkit that can be used at our facilities, including kind of how to engage, how to deal with complaints, how to make sure that we're addressing issues in a really intentional manner. I think has been I think it's just, it comes back to like the reason why I did all of this to begin with.
Yeah.
Also, I
Full
think
circle.
yeah, and I think it also just highlights how cool Owens Corning is to be able to, you know, recognize the value in that, because it really does, it's our license to operate, right?
It is, and I
and
can't tell you, we've talked about that guidebook toolkit before, which I was in awe of, because I think that most companies, and I'm not saying all, but many, you know, wait for a problem to happen before they engage with the community. And I think this sort of proactive relationship building, you know, definitely enhances your social component. What's important to the people in your community and where you operate your facilities or where you run your business. And then there's a trust that's built through that process that just makes, you know, glitches are going to happen, and it makes it so much easier. So I kudos to you. I think that is a huge success. So
thank you. Thank you.
that is fantastic. And I guess I feel like we can't have this conversation without at least mentioning anti-ESG. I do predict a increase in anti-ESG. Right now, it's really relating mostly to pensions and stuff like that on the state level. Do you have any thoughts or advice on, you know, how to handle this anti-ESG spirit, or how a company should manage that?
I mean, it's kind of hard to give advice on how to manage it per se, because I think it depends upon
Sure.
the company's. I mean, the way that we've kind of looked at it is, look, we're aware of it and we still remain committed to all of our goals and our priorities. But the main piece of that is because we have seen and we have continued to see that our commitments and what we've already put out there and committed to provide long-term shareholder value. It's not just this is a feel-good kind of thing, which I think that sometimes is part of the rhetoric of the anti-ESG argument out there, but there's financial performance that's actually associated with these metrics. And that's what we focus on. And I think our shareholders agree to that and also see that.
When you're aligning with what your shareholders are looking for and your other stakeholders, like you are with your employees, you really, that sets you up for success. I couldn't agree more with that. So what's your prediction for ESG for 2025? I sort of shared mine a little bit, but what's yours?
I was thinking about, I'm thinking about prepping for like 2025 to begin with and 2026. I think that transparency is still going to be really important. It's going to be important in a different way, more in a global sense than in the US. The US is just going to be, to me, I think it's going to be a lot of state-led initiatives and components, which is going to lead to a lot of piecemeal patchwork and difficult to kind of keep track of. I anticipate, Europe and maybe Canada at this point, I don't know. I mean, the geopolitical pieces of everything will also make this kind of complicated.
Yeah, true.
But I think that there's so much momentum that it's going to be really difficult to kind of halt as a whole.
Yeah.
So, will things be as, I think, as driven as they have been in the past? I think it depends on region and location and geography.
Yeah. I think the global companies are certainly going to take the lead, and it's going to cause a lot of frustration for those that are having to focus on a state level for sure. So we shall see. I personally don't think it's going anywhere. It's been around for a long time. It has different names. We might be rebranding things, but it's there to stay. So I always like to ask at the end, and I know you pretty well, so I feel like I could answer this for you. But that being said, when you are not fulfilling your many, many roles and hats that you wear at OC these days, or taking care of your kids, what is it that you do for fun?
And to
say sane, I should say.
Try to make enough me time, right? It's important. Well, I love being with my family, but love traveling. I just had foot surgery, so I'm not doing this right now, but I'm an avid like tennis player and pickleball player, and
You have a court at your house, right?
we do have a pickleball.
So
It
you're
came
all
with the
invited to
house.
come over to Mindy's and play pickleball.
Open invitation. And I'm learning how to play Mahjong right now because I'm kind of sedentary. So just playing kind of games and love audiobooks. I'm addicted to
Awesome.
audiobooks right now.
Awesome. See, so our ESG gurus are real people doing real things. So thank you so much. Mindy, you have been a guide for me on my ESG journey. I feel like honored to partner with you on OC related things, but your leadership around this, your thought process, especially on the environmental justice piece, is really something that should be commended. And I'm honored that we had a chance to chat today. And I thank you so much for your time and your insights. A perfect way to kick off 2025. And
thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. This concludes today's discussion. This webinar was recorded, remember that, and will be available to both view in our library on YouTube and through the podcast. We encourage you to visit our YouTube page and to subscribe to stay up to date. You don't want to miss any of these guru series. We thank you for attending the program, and special thank you again to Mindy. Everyone have a great rest of the day, and I hope your 2025 starts pretty well. Thanks.
Thank you.